Hello and good evening. Will you kindly take your seats, please? We have a full house tonight. My name is Daniel Pedroletti, President of the New Helvetic Society, which is organizing tonight's event in association with the Federation of Swiss Society in the United Kingdom. On behalf of both societies, I would like to welcome you all tonight. I particularly would like to welcome tonight's speaker, His Excellency the Ambassador of Switzerland, Monsieur Alexandre Fasel. We are grateful to him for accepting our invitation to address the Swiss community and friends of Switzerland. Monsieur Fasel started his tour of duty in the United Kingdom late last summer, I believe. He is a lawyer and no stranger to the UK since he studied at Oxford. His chosen subject is Brexit. What does it mean for the British and Swiss destiny in Europe? It could not be a more appropriate subject, as Brexit is of great concern to the Swiss living in the UK as individuals or as members of the business community. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to the Ambassador of Switzerland, Monsieur Alexandre Fasel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames et Messieurs, bonsoir et bienvenue à l'ambassade de Suisse. Welcome at the Embassy of Switzerland. It's a great pleasure to have you here tonight, and thank you very much for the invitation to address the New Helvetic Society and also the different Swiss associations through FOSSUK and a online streaming tonight. So the whole country is with us tonight. All my predecessors, whom I consulted as to how a good ambassador should conduct himself in London, told me that they had one advice: get out of London, see the country for yourself. London is not the United Kingdom. And at the same time, they all said, and I regret I didn't do that sufficiently. Didn't do that enough. So that is my stated ambition, to go out and meet the Swiss community all over the United Kingdom. And if you don't see me, then please hold me to account. Send me an invitation so that I can come and engage with the Swiss community. In the UK, we are around 35,000 Swiss citizens living here. And that we are promoting the cultural and commercial exchanges between our two countries and contribute through that to deepening this enduring friendship between the United Kingdom and Switzerland. And as the official representation of Switzerland in the UK, the task of this embassy is to maintain and develop those ties on a daily basis and to further the Swiss interests across these islands of Great Britain and the United Kingdom. Now, strengthening those bonds is of paramount importance as the United Kingdom prepares to leave the European Union. And we are working hard to ensure that we can provide clarity and continuity in our post-Brexit relations between Switzerland and the United Kingdom. So tonight I would like to elaborate on that in three chapters. The first one is, how is the Brexit process progressing? The second point will be, what are the repercussions of the Brexit process on our bilateral relations and the standing of the Swiss interests in the United Kingdom? And the third element will be to focus on how that will affect the Swiss citizens living in the UK, because I see and feel, and understandably so, that there is a certain concern amongst the Swiss living here about the future conditions of their staying in the United Kingdom. And then we will have une discussion à bâton rompu, questions and answer sessions. So Brexit. Brexit represents, of course, a formidable challenge for the British government, for the European Union, for the countries, member states of the European Union, but also for all countries, third states, that have bilateral preferential accords with the EU. So Brexit does affect Switzerland because we have this close-knit network of bilateral agreements with the EU. And once the UK leaves the EU, that causes a problem for Switzerland. So Brexit is not only a British and EU problem, it is also a Swiss problem. On the 23rd of June 2016, the British electorate was asked to answer a very simple question. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union, or should it leave the European Union? And so there was an answer provided to that by the electorate, and the British authorities, the British polity, now has to answer a certain amount of questions. How can this popular vote be turned into a tangible result which is in the interest of Great Britain? How, while doing so, can the Westminster system take into account the interests of the 52%, but also of the 48%? Because the vote has been deeply divisive, as any vote would be, but in this case we see that the divisions are across parties, across nations, generations, regions, countryside, cities, across families and couples even. So there is a lot of convergence needed again as the country goes forward. And then we see that, of course, it must be a very complex exercise because there is a very integrated state of 40 years membership in a supranational community to be untangled. But through this being a member of the EU, virtually all aspects of life were touched upon by the EU and by EU law. So how do you disentangle that? And we have seen that in 2017 that this work creates quite some turbulences that we have seen this year and we are bound to see next year as well. At the end of March, we saw the beginning of the formal 2-year negotiation period for the UK's departure. So once the letter, according to Article 50, was sent, that set off the process. And within 2 years, the separation agreement has to be negotiated. And if that is not possible, then there is this 2-year period provided by Article 50 on the 29th of March 2019. Britain will have left the European Union. That is the date which is a secure one. There is one possibility is if in those 2 years the British and the UK negotiate a separation agreement that sets a precise date when the UK will leave, that will then be the date, must not necessarily be the 29th of March 2019. That is the default deadline on the grounds of Article 50, but it can be another one. There have been frantic negotiations, as you could read in the papers, between the British and the EU, and in December, a preliminary deal was struck covering the major issues of the British withdrawal, and those were the 3 issues the EU wanted to have settled, discussed and settled before embarking on the discussion on the future relationship. And those 3 issues were citizens' rights, the financial obligations of the UK towards the European Union, and the question of the Northern Irish border. Now, 2018 will be very interesting as well, because now they have to take what they have agreed in December and turn it into a legal agreement. That's a political text that was drafted, which of course engages the both parties, but now they have to turn that into agreement and settle the finer points, and that will be a very difficult work to do. Then they will have to discuss about the transitional period. The British have applied for a transitional period after March 2019, a period of 2 years, in order to have time to adapt to the new situation of being a non-member. And the EU has agreed. But what does exactly mean a transitional period? How is the legal situation in this transitional period? So that has to be negotiated as well. And then, time permitting, they will also discuss about the future relationship. Although I'm not sure they will be discussing much about the future relationship in 2018, because the negotiations on the separation agreement, first the discussion on the transitional period, how that will is going to look like, and then the separation agreement will take probably a lot of the energy, and it has to be finished, say, around October 2018, because you need to allow for parliamentary processes in all the EU member states in order to be ready by the 29th. You remember the deadline by default of the 29th of March 2019. And during that year, a lot of questions will be asked, and you will see the same febrility that we had last year in the papers, on TV programs, on radio, on a very large number of questions. I mean, when such a mature democracy like the UK decides to leave the European Union, which it has been a member of for nearly 45 years, then I mean, that's a fascinating aspect. There is a mature democracy that reinvents itself. The Brits are reinventing their country. And so a lot of questions go with that. How will the future relationship look like? And the Prime Minister has repeatedly said that Britain wants a new, deep, special partnership with the European Union that is as close as possible. But what will that mean? Will that entail what they call a regulatory alignment, so that the norms and the standards that are valid in the single market are valid here as well? Or will there be a possibility to diverge from the laws and regulations of the single market? Which rule will they take over? And if they take over rules of the EU, will that hamper the UK in their activity, which is geared towards having new trade treaties with third countries, with non-members of the EU? Will the government decide to make financial contributions to the EU, even after having left the European Union, in order to safeguard access to the European market, notably for the city? How will the new relationship be governed? I mean, when you have an international treaty, there must be dispute settlement mechanisms. Treaties must be governed. How do you do that? What is the role of the European Court of Justice in such a setup? The Europeans tend to demand that the European Court of Justice has an important role to play. That is something we as Swiss don't like and reject, and something which the British government has already said that they don't want to do. How is the Northern Irish question going to be settled? Now we know, on the basis of the agreement in December, that there should be no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, and there should be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the mainland Great Britain. So how is that going to be organized? And then what will the status be of the transition period? Is that, as Mr. Hammond said, an off-the-shelf transition period? We just take what is valid now and have it run on for an additional 2 years? Or is it a transitional period where you already modulate what is valid and what is not valid anymore? I think it will be an off-the-shelf, but that has to be negotiated. So all those questions will keep the British and the Europeans busy, but will also keep the Swiss embassy and the Swiss authorities busy, because we have to observe very precisely what is happening, understand what is happening, because that has an immediate implication on how we deal with the question of Brexit and how we try to safeguard our interests in the whole context. That leads me to my second point. And that's the question, how does Switzerland deal with Brexit? The starting point here is that we have an extremely close economic and commercial trading relationship with the UK. Let me take you through some figures. Switzerland is a top 10 destination for UK goods exports globally. Top 10 amongst the top 10 export countries for UK goods. And if we take the non-EU markets, we are the third largest export market for the UK goods after the USA and China. That's for the goods. We're even more important in export of services. There, Switzerland is the fourth most important market worldwide for UK services, with more than 3 times the value of UK services exports to China. Can you imagine that? Those are figures of 2015. Switzerland, and I go on, Switzerland is the 7th largest foreign direct investor in the UK. So hugely important for the British economy. And we can see how close our relations are when we see at the daily flights between the Swiss airports and the UK. There are more than 150 daily scheduled flights. Can you imagine? 150. So that shows how closely interwoven our economies are. And that is all on the basis of Switzerland's bilateral agreements with the EU and UK's membership of the EU. So once the UK leaves the EU, we have nothing bilaterally between Switzerland and the UK, because we are tied through our agreements with the EU. So what we have to do is to make sure that we put into place a legal regime that will be ready in time to come and replace what we had with the UK as EU members for the day they are not EU members anymore. So that we replicate, that we roll over what we had with them through their membership in the EU. Because otherwise, there is a legal gap. This legal foundation of many, many different treaties that are the groundwork for this close economic relation will just evaporate if we do not bring something into place. And that's what the Federal Council calls the Mind the Gap strategy. The Mind the Gap strategy is that we want to avoid legal gaps. We want to ensure that the existing mutual rights and obligations in our relationship with the UK will continue to apply after the UK leaves the EU. And if it is possible, even to go further and to develop those rights and obligations where it is possible. The Swiss Federal Council has followed the discussion very closely from the very beginning of when Mr. Cameron said that he was planning to have a referendum. In the immediate aftermath, the Federal Council designed this strategy, the Mind the Gap strategy, which I just presented, and adopted it in October 2016. And from then on, we have been in direct conversation with Whitehall and also with Westminster to put that strategy into place. And we have now a setup where we have this leading group that coordinates those conversations. We can't call them negotiations because as long as the UK has not left the EU, they are not allowed to negotiate with third countries. So those are discussions, continuity dialogue, they are called. So you have the top level that coordinates everything, and then you have work streams that look into the different legal arrangements we have with the EU and discuss how they can be adapted to our bilateral relations once the UK leaves. And so there are 8 work streams: trade, migration and citizens' rights, financial services, aviation, land transport, fight against fraud, education, and data protection. So those are the fields we have together defined as determining for a good economic relations we need. That's what we need in order to safeguard the level we have now. And what we have done is that those working streams have jointly, the Brits with the Swiss, analyzed what is the problem, what is the risk, what do we risk losing, how can we solve that, and then also a reverse planning in time. Who needs to do what by when in order to be ready for B-Day and to have those new arrangements in place. What does that mean calendar-wise? Because, of course, our respective parliament must then also ratify that. So you have the discussion on the substance, you have what will be the negotiation, and then you also have all the ratification and the democratic procedures in our countries to see that through. Part of the work in those 8 streams we can do on our own, the Brits and the Swiss together. That's where the legal arrangements are based on traditional free trade agreements. But in part, we are dependent on what the British and the UK will decide. When it is about taking over single market law, when it is about integrating into the single market with regulatory alignment, with taking over single market law in order to gain access to the single market. In those domains, we logically depend on what the UK will agree with the EU for their future relationship. So we are a bit dependent. We can do some of the work we can do on our own, and some of the work we need to observe what the UK and the EU are doing. And that's why this embassy is affected by it all, because we have to follow very closely and to see what is happening. I come to the third chapter of my talk. It is about migration and citizen rights. As I said, that's the second work stream we have, the question of citizen rights. And the Swiss government has engaged in close discussions with the British authorities to ensure continuity and the protection of acquired rights of Swiss nationals living in the UK. And in December, in this preliminary agreement of the UK with the EU, you saw that the UK government intends to set up a new process to enable EU citizens to apply for so-called settled status. And the system is expected to be rolled out by the end of 2018, and all EU citizens wishing to remain in the UK will be asked to register. And that is what is on offer for the EU citizens. And that is what will be on offer for the Swiss citizens as well. So what the EU citizens will get, the Swiss citizens should get as well. That's what we're working on, and we have no indication to the contrary. Now, subject to the ongoing discussions between Switzerland and the UK, we do expect that the Swiss citizens looking to remain in the UK will also be asked to apply for new settled status. When I say they will have to apply to the status, that's a legal finesse. For the UK, it is important they agree that all the European citizens and those non-European citizens, such as us, who are here on the basis, on the grounds of the free movement of persons, that they can remain here. But they want it to be because they have decided that they can remain here, and not because European law dictates it. Since they are leaving, it cannot be the European law that dictates to the Brits that the Europeans can settle here. They are deciding it. That's why they have this process, an application process, which at the same time will be some sort of registration process, a registration of the citizens living here, which they don't have yet. So, but people who qualify, that is, who have lived here for 5 years, will then get, they will have applied and they will get the settled status. There are only very few criteria which could stand against, and these are criminal offense. So if you are a criminal, then you are in trouble. Fraudulent application, if you cheat in your application form, you lie about the number of years you've been living here and so on. And the cutoff date, you have to apply in time. And the cutoff date will be, as it stands now, but that possibly is still going to be negotiated, stands now at March, end of March 2019. So by then, you have had to apply. Now, we have been closely liaising with the Home Office as the design of this new application procedure becomes clearer and is being developed. The Home Office seeks the proximity of embassies, such as ours, in order to test their ideas about how this application process should be designed, how it can be made not too cumbersome and user-friendly and so on and so forth. And so Joachim Tomaschet, my colleague here sitting in the first row, is working on that, liaising with the Home Office and with the Swiss community to establish the link, bring from the Swiss communities the input to the Foreign Office, saying this is a problem, look out for that, we should be designed this and that, and the other way around as well, the Home Office tests the ideas. So what we can say is that they are trying to have a smooth and streamlined procedure. The applications for settled status will be transparent, smooth, and streamlined, the Foreign Office says, and the application forms will be short, simple, user-friendly, and online-based. That's how they are going to go about things. And there will be dedicated Home Office caseworkers to support applicants by telephone or face-to-face to complete the online form. Then, about the deadline. counting from the moment of the UK's exit, you will have at least 2 years to apply for settled status. And during this period, you will enjoy your current residency rights. And then, what are the requirements? What sort of evidence you need to give to prove that you've been here for 5 years? Here, the authorities will seek to use evidence already available to them to reduce the evidence applicants will need to provide. So applicants will only have to provide the minimum evidence necessary to show that they qualify for settled status. That will be ID, proof of 5 years residence, proof that they continue to reside here in the UK. So it seems, as it stands now, it will be a relatively smooth process. You will have to apply, and you will be given status. So I would like to tackle a few misperceptions that create some nervosity within the community. Will Swiss people without British citizenship be asked to leave the country after Brexit? That is one of the questions we keep hearing, and the answer is no. If you're lawfully residing in the UK at the time of Brexit, you will be able to apply for the new so-called settled status. Another question is, the British government does not have an actual record of who is living legally in the UK. And the answer here is that the UK authorities will seek to use evidence already available to them, such as records on taxes paid, on wages, HMRC data, DWP, the Department of Working Pensions data. So they will take all the data they already have in order to reduce the evidence applicants have to provide. The question is, will the UK impose expensive residence fees or visas? And here again, the answer is no. The cost of applying for settled status will not exceed £72. And for those already holding permanent residence, the document will be issued free of charge. Another question is, will the British government introduce a minimum income requirement for Swiss citizens living in the UK? And the answer is no. There is no such threshold. People who are lawfully residing in the UK at the exit date will be able to apply for the settled status. So you see, under the deal which was struck between the UK and the EU in December, close family members such as spouses, civil partners, and unmarried partners, dependent children and grandchildren, and dependent parents and grandparents will be able to join EU citizens even after Brexit, where the relationship existed before the 29th of March 2019 and continues to exist when they wish to come to the UK. So even there, that will be possible. So you see, the situation is such that we do everything and are very confident that the Swiss citizens will be treated as the EU citizens will be treated, such I have just presented. And that, by the way, is in essence everything we are doing in the Mind the Gap strategy. And we will see whether we can still have more, since the Federal Council has decided that the strategy is minding the gap, but also expanding and deepening the relationship. But Mind the Gap will, I'm sure, be safeguarded here. We have on the website of the embassy a frequently asked question section that we constantly update as the discussions progress and new elements are being ascertained and we can share with the Swiss citizens. So that's your first port of call. You go on the website and you see whether your question is answered there, and you can trust that what is on that website is the latest available information as we update it regularly on a permanent basis. And otherwise, if you have questions, please turn to the embassy and we will try to answer them. And if you wish for further information sessions such as this one, be it here in London or somewhere in the United Kingdom, please call upon us and we will be happy to come and share our experience and our insight with you. So, Brexit is a complex endeavor, and minding the gap, running after Brexit and seeing after our own interests in that context is a complex endeavor. But our setup is a good one. We're progressing well, and I believe our interests will be safeguarded in a very good manner. So thank you very much for your attention. That is what I wanted to tell you, and I'm looking forward to exchange in a question and answer session now. Merci.
So thank you very much, Ambassador Fasel. For those of you that I'm sure you have many questions, we're now opening up the session, and I do know that probably half an hour won't be sufficient, so we will welcome you after to stay over a few drinks, and you will have an opportunity to discuss further questions with Ambassador Fasel and also with the other delegates that are actually present here tonight. So I guess for me is to open officially the Q&A session, and we have a microphone for your disposal. We have a question already from Franz Muheim.
Good evening, Franz Muheim. I'm a delegate to the Council of the Swiss Abroad. Mr. Ambassador, the Swiss are very good and very effective, and this mind the gap strategy is clearly the right approach. There's one problem I foresee, and I hope you have realized it already. When the Home Office says something, you take it as face value. At least that's what I read from an answer I got from an email to Joachim Tomaschek. Please don't. We all know, in the best of time, the Home Office is not equipped to do what they should. Never underestimate the power of incompetence. The other point is the political climate right now obviously is not is not very good, because while Theresa May announced the deal with the EU about citizen rights, the next morning the Brexit secretary said, this is not a deal. We'll see later. So I've written letters before, and I've asked you to not only mind the gap, but look at the fine print. What I mean by that is, you cannot expect that the Home Office will be able to deliver what they want, even if they have the best intention to. Because tradition, everything speaks against it. So there will be trouble abroad. It won't be as smoothly, unfortunately, as we would like. Swiss efficiency is not compatible with the Home Office.
I feel, I mean, in my experience, in my 25 years of diplomacy, having a lot of dealings with Whitehall, the British administration is probably the best in the world and second only to the Swiss one. So yes, I have confidence that it will be all good. And they just have to get on with it. And then, of course, you have to take the solid matter, what they actually agree and what they then actually do, from the whole political ground noise that goes with it. As I said, 17 was turbulent, 18 will be hugely turbulent. And every day you will read about the cabinet not agreeing on this and that, and the ministers, the cabinet ministers going out and saying contradictory things and so on and so forth. That is part of the political, this is how it happens. And certainly in a situation with a minority government, hung parliament, and total uncertainty how a next general election would, what sort of result such an election would produce. So that's politics. And then you have what is actually agreed and what they actually set out to achieve. And then it is important that we are closely involved in that working group of the Home Office and able to hear what you're telling us on the basis, you know, in your regions, when you see there is a problem and so on and so forth, then please tell us so that we can tell them. So we are their agents of yours with the Home Office. And the Home Office asks us to play that role because they want that it is a smooth running and so on and so forth. The process is difficult, but we have to help them to pull it off, and we should not become prisoners of self-fulfilling prophecies that want to predict that it is going to be a failure.
Thank you. I do have a question over there. Yes, then the gentleman at the back. I've seen you.
By statute, you hear me?
Yes.
By statute and common knowledge and international law, Switzerland is not a member of European Union. How can whatever agreement they make with Europe can affect their future relation with Britain legally? I don't understand.
Yeah. So, we have a series of agreements with the European Union now. Over 140 treaties, of which about 20 are really important. They're all important, but 20 are, you know, the cornerstones of it all. Those treaties tie us to the UK as well, because the UK is a member of the EU.
Not anymore.
No, it is. It is till at least the 29th of March 2019. Then comes Brexit Day. The UK is not anymore a member of the European Union. Then all the relations, the legal relations we had with the UK through their membership in the EU disappears. So then we have nothing with the EU, with the UK. And so what we need to do is now to discuss with them and put in place agreements that replicate what we have now. It will then not be anymore bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the EU encompassing the UK. It will be bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the EU, that continues, and bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the UK. And we have to make sure that they don't diverge, that it is more or less the same we have there. And certainly it must be the same as the UK will have with the EU. So you see, we are in some sort of triangle. We have what we have with the EU. It used to be with the UK, will not be any longer. So we need something with the UK. And we have to make sure that we are as well off as the UK is with the EU. And so, by doing so, we are re-establishing the level playing field we have commercially now until the Brexit day.
I think there was the lady in front. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Ambassador. I have a couple of questions. Will the status be in perpetuity, similar to what a green card in the US means? Or people applying will apply for the status, and then if they ever leave the UK for some professional reasons, they cannot return back to the status? It's hard to understand from what the media publishes.
Now, I could now pretend to know exactly by reading Joe's lips and reproduce what he's trying to tell me, but I will ask my expert. Joe?
Unless you leave the UK for a period for over 5 years, then you will lose. So if you're remaining outside for 5 years, then you will lose. The status will lapse. But if you go, it will be permanent.
Okay, 5 years. If you leave for 5 years, you lose it lapses. Okay, but then you can come back and reapply.
No, then you will apply under the new UK national migration.
Right, under the new migration. So it's quasi-permanent.
We have a question here. Vince Croze.
So, yeah, I'm Vincent. I'm one of the delegates to the CSA as well, like Franz. So you gave this list of the 8 different points that Switzerland is talking about with the UK. I can't remember the list of them all, actually. But I was wondering, there's one thing that I thought was missing in this, and probably it's actually included in one of the 8 topics. You didn't really mention anything that's related to science and research and technology, and including to that also maybe about ecology and environment. And I was wondering if that's also included in those discussions and what those talks could be and what those bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the UK could be regarding those topics.
Yep, it's in the 7th work stream, which I just called education, but there you would have science research, also mutual recognition of diplomas and so on and so forth. So that is being looked after. What do you mean with environment? What kind of... I mean, it is norms and standards that have been set up for environmental reasons are being dealt with in the trade, where they affect goods, where we want to have freedom of trade with it. So yes, implicitly that is in there as well, but not as a standalone work stream, but integrated. Because that's a horizontal question that is dealt with virtually in all the trade streams.
The lady front, Natalie.
Possibly we can take 2 or 3 questions at a time. So there's.
I have a question that is relating. That is relating to this question. About the settled status. So will it be the case that once you have the settled status, that you will be sort of driven towards an application in citizenship, or can you just eternally remain settled? I can see head shaking from Mr. Tomaschet. And then I have another question, which is about the renegotiations between UK and Switzerland now. You said that, of course, we are looking to have at the minimum the same agreement as we have now to get the status quo, but possibly some improvements. So what would be some improvements that we are looking to make as opposed to what we already currently have with the EU?
Yep, another point of view. And then over there.
Hi. Once you have your settled status, is there like a stamp on your passport, or what is going to be? Because I have dual nationality, but I travel only with my Swiss passport. Do I have to prove that I have dual nationality by having the British passport with me all the time?
That really is a luxury problem, I feel. And possibly Monsieur over there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for an illuminating talk. I'm a dual national, we'll know it, like many people here. But could you just touch briefly on the status of purely British nationals in Switzerland? It might be interesting to know that.
So, for the settled status, the first question, Joe, what is the answer? Will there be a document issued, or?
There will be an electronic document that is going to be issued. So you get a reference number, and you don't need to have a stamp. You will not have a stamp in your passport, but you get a reference number. So when you enter via customs, they will get the reference number in the system, and you actually have settled.
And would they see that number even if you? Would they recognize you from name because you came with a Swiss passport rather than a British one?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the main identification issue will be this reference number, the electronic one. The other question on citizenship, you don't have to apply for citizenship. The settled status will be permanent. As said, unless you're absent from the British territory for more than 5 years. But there is the possibility of dual citizenship, both under Swiss and British law. So you're not losing either of your nationalities if you apply for the second one. And then the questions maybe on the UK citizens in Switzerland. Obviously what we are discussing with the British authorities is on a reciprocal basis. So the same solutions and the same settlements will apply to British citizens in Switzerland eventually.
And then what we are trying to have more, that is only interesting if, are you a lawyer? No. That's, I should, Joe told me, don't say that in your talk because if there is a question, you will not find your way out of it again. Because you need to be a lawyer to find it interesting. The question is, where does this settled status come from? So the UK says it's us. We're giving the settled status. And the EU is now happy with that. But they were not at the beginning. They said, no. They have a right on the grounds of European law. It's not you that are conferring this right to them. They have it already. But the Brits said, no, we are giving it because we are going out, and so it can't be further direct effect of European law. Okay? So the EU has agreed. We have not yet agreed that it is the Britain that gives those rights, and it is not what we call acquired rights that survive, and you just have it, and you do not need the Brits to give it to you. So we haven't yet agreed with it. So that means we are in a situation of negotiation where we will try to get something for our agreeing with that. That can be in that domain or any other of the 7 domains. That's just on the basis of a legal concept. That's nearly legal philosophy. We're trying to have a lever to go and get something somewhere. And Madame là-bas derrière.
Hello, I'm Nathalie Schua. Thank you very much for this great talk. I have a question regarding those 8 workforces you were talking. And you said that some of them are dependent on EU negotiation with the UK, and some of them we can handle directly with the UK. And I was just wondering, what is is the UK collaborating? Are they open for that? Because we come already with a plan, or given they're so busy that they're not so interested in fixing those topics.
And Madame là-bas.
Thank you. I have a rather specific question about the freedom of circulation of lawyers. So my question is whether a UK qualified lawyer can work in Switzerland and enjoy the status, the EU lawyer status.
And yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your time and for answering the questions. My question is about, would you expect that there will be a knock-on effect on the agreements between Switzerland and the EU if there is a transformation in the landscape of the UK post-Brexit? And is there anything that the government in Switzerland is actually looking to have some kind of a review of the 140 agreements, for example, for the financial services, if there is a transformation around the weight of the financial services and how actually that would affect the relationships between the EU and Switzerland? Thank you.
So the first question, are the British engaging with us? And the answer is yes. We came to see them very early in the process. They had difficulties understanding what we were saying. So we had, there was a lot of awareness raising, explaining what our reading was of what had happened, what the consequences would be. We had to demonstrate why that was important, because Switzerland is such an important commercial partner. We had to show them that we were actually using their figures to show that we are the 3rd or the 4th most important export market for services, and so on and so forth. In the beginning, they were just asking questions, and they were in listening mode, very much sitting on the fence. That was as they were going through their process of doing their homework and putting their head around the situation and finding out what it was and what they wanted to do. And as they did that, they saw that what we had told them was what they discovered by themselves. And on that basis, then there was a very forward-leaning cooperation, which works very well on the top level and in the working streams. So yes, there is a good engagement. They tell us that we are the trailblazers. I mean, they have to replicate treaties third countries had with the EU, with a great number of countries. And probably they cannot do it with all of them in one go, but certainly 40 plus countries that are important enough to them economically, they have to do it with them. And amongst all those, they tell us that we are the trailblazers, they are doing this exercise with us. So in terms of substance and also methodology to be applied to the others. So yes, it is a good would UK qualified lawyers have the same status in Switzerland? So the answer is yes, basically yes. It will follow as it was now. And how is the link between Brexit and our relations to the EU? So that is that's like explain the world and give 2 examples. Yes, there is a link. Many interlinkages indeed, and we see that in our relations with the EU that have first accelerated a bit in our discussions on a framework agreement and then slowed down again and now accelerating possibly again. So what is happening in Brexit does have an influence on what we're doing. Is it a positive? Is it negative? Is it accelerating? Is it slowing down? It's a bit of everything, depending on the political and economic climate of the day. So it's very difficult to have a clear sense. But that's why then you have embassies such as ours. So we are listening and reporting what we're seeing here, our colleagues in Brussels there, and so the Federal Council then tries to make sense out of it. What is clear is that we have to look after our own interest. Towards the EU, and the UK are looking after their interest towards the EU, and we have to make sure that together we are looking after our bilateral interests. I do not think that we can hide behind the Brits and Brexit in order to forcefully march towards greener pastures in our relations with the EU. Our relations with the EU is our job, and we have to look after it ourselves, while taking into account the fallout Brexit may bring or not.
Unfortunately, we have time for the last few questions. So those of you that I have, yes.
Monsieur, Madame, et puis Vincent. Voilà, Madame derrière.
Hi, good evening. So I have actually two questions, one on trade and one on people. So first question on trade. One of the links between the EU and Switzerland, and of course by definition the UK now, is in the pharmaceutical industry, is the mutual recognition agreement between the EU and Switzerland, which allows batch testing and so like something manufactured in Switzerland to be recognized in the UK without having it tested again. How high up on the agenda is keeping this mutual recognition agreement?
Top.
Post Brexit. So that's and if so, like what are you doing to keep this, well, ensure that this keeps on going? Because yesterday there was the select committee discussion, and it seems like the Department of Health says they don't have any mitigation plans. So that's my first question on trade. The second one is regarding people. If a Swiss citizen has not stayed in the UK for over five years, can they still apply for settled status? Thank you.
Say again the second question.
Oh, when Brexit happens, if a Swiss citizen has not stayed in the UK for at least 5 years, can they still apply for settled status?
So I'll start with the second one. Yes. If the Swiss citizen is here by the moment Britain Brexits, he or she can apply and will be here and will be given the status once the 5 years are fulfilled. You do not need to have the 5 years. 5 years is to get the status, the settled status, but is not a condition to apply. To apply, you need to be here, and you can come here on the grounds of the free movement of people as long as Brexit hasn't happened. That is, 29th of March 1919. And for trade, yes, that's top priority. Top priority, but because those mutual recognition agreements are following EU rules, we need to see what the solution will be, whether the Brits will be rule takers in that domain or not, which we hope, so that we can keep the setup as it is. And if they wouldn't, then we will have to see. But I can't imagine how they wouldn't. I mean, there is too much at stake for their own economic interests to go their own way there.
Would the embassy consider?
Yeah, c'est bon.
Would the embassy consider sponsoring a settled status application, say in that confirming that one is registered with the embassy at the cutoff date?
Would that be necessary?
No, I'm...
Yes, I'm just thinking whether... Yes, I see the logic. If it was necessary, yes, of course. Is that something you have been discussing with them?
The Home Office has inquired with us whether we keep registers of the Swiss citizens residing in the UK. We confirm this. I guess that could be an option as well.
Okay.
Then to give have further evidence of the length of your stay. So yes.
Yeah.
It would simplify considerably.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So obviously they are aware of our system, and they have already. Yeah. They have asked for confirmation that we have the system. And yes, so if that was the way they go, then that's what we would be doing, yes.
So maybe just a slightly more philosophical question, maybe, if I may say. So you said 2018 will be quite tumultuous and complicated and so on. What, in your opinion, is the best thing that should happen in 2018 for Brexit to be successful? In other words, if you had like one wish for something to happen, what would you like to happen?
That's the last question, isn't it?
It is the last question, yes.
I'm not sure I can answer the question, because I can answer it in my personal view, but then I'm not entitled to that view in the British political debate, because I'm Swiss and I'm not I'm not a British citizen voting or having an opinion here. And generally, probably your answer cannot be answered, because it is a function of where you come from and what your definition of Brexit is. If you are a hard Brexiter, you need something. If you are a remoaner, you need something else. So it depends on where you're coming from and what your vision is. So there is no general answer to that. And that's precisely why we have the situation, in this country as it is. Otherwise, it wouldn't have febrility and grande casino as what we're seeing it. What I do expect is that you will have a lot of politicking in the papers and morning news and so on and so forth, as we have had in 2017. But not much will move in terms of substance. So you will not gain a lot of clarity during 2018. You will still have the clash of the different opinions as we had it since the debate. And then, when it comes to Parliament, because Parliament will have a meaningful vote, that is this amendment that passed. And that's where it will happen. So towards the end of 2018, early 2019, that's when it happens. What will Parliament do with the result government brings back from the negotiating table? Will that be okay for Parliament, or will Parliament want to have something else, possibly something closer to soft or sensible or whatever? It's where it will happening. So I will attempt to hear through the noise to see whether the signe avant-coureur from December 18, what Parliament thinks by then. That probably will be the game. But I mean, for what it was.
Thank
Merci.
you. Thank you, Ambassador Fasel. Thank you. So this brings us to the end of the question and answers session. And I'm certain that a lot of you have still have a lot of questions. And as I said, you can join us after for a nice Swiss wine, a glass of Swiss wine, which has been kindly offered by Ambassador Fasel. I would like to thank Ambassador Fasel and his team for this very informative session. And I also would like to thank the volunteers of the New Helvetic Society that are actually making tonight possible. Without volunteers, we wouldn't be able to host an evening such as this one. Last but not least, because I'm sure that you're quite warm and you would like us to open the windows, but I'd like to introduce you the OSSE delegates. So I'd like the delegates to come up with me, please. The OSSE delegates, for those of you that do not know, OSSE is the organization of the Swiss abroad. And in the United Kingdom, we are allowed to have 5 delegates. And the 5 delegates represent the Swiss expatriates in the UK, and we represent them at the council back in Switzerland. Therefore, if there are any concerns that you want to talk to us about, obviously do approach us. We're here tonight, as well as the ambassador and his team, but I'm conscious of the fact that probably not all of you will be able to talk directly with Ambassador Fasel. Therefore, we're here also to support, and any question you have, we will gladly pass it on to the embassy. So thank you very much, everybody. Last housekeeping information that I have to give you, if you could please fold up your chairs and put them to the side, and then we can bring out the wine. Thank you.